Today we have with us is Chris Reed from Priceline, and Chris is going to be talking about something that we talk about a lot right now, is like how do we kind of shift left in with what we're doing with FinOps. And without giving anything else away, because I know nothing about this and he knows everything, well, almost everything about it, I'm going to introduce Chris Reed, so please give him a round of applause. Everything. You know everything.
Oh man, those are tough shoes to fill there when she just said that I know everything about this space, right? All right, so I'm sure you guys are expecting some like premier content here, given what Stacy just put me up on and set the bar for. So my name is Chris Reed. I am the Senior Director of IT Finance for Priceline. Priceline is a booking holdings brand. Booking holdings has brands such as Priceline.com, Booking.com, Kayak, Agoda, and OpenTable. Right? In my role, like Senior Director of IT Finance, many people have asked me today and yesterday, so do you sit in finance? And no, the answer is I actually sit within the CTO organization. And I think that that gives me a unique perspective in managing all of our tech costs, right? So I'm currently responsible for our entire technology budget. That includes the people, consulting, our cloud spend, and then our second highest spend, which is actually software. And so natural progression after we went through our FinOps journey, and I guess I use the term through loosely because we're still going in our FinOps journey and maturing in that space. But a large part of that is bringing in those FinOps principles that we apply to the cloud and applying those same kind of things to SaaS, right? My CFO was like, hey, you guys did such a great job on this cloud thing. Here's another big category of spend. Why don't you tackle that? And CTO's like, yeah, Chris, get your team and do that, right? And so we'll talk to you guys a little bit about that today. So without further ado, as everybody's trickling in from lunchtime, we'll move on. So why does SaaS optimization matter, right? I don't think you'd be here if you didn't think it mattered. So we'll start off with that. SaaS growth and the challenge of decentralized management. Like, what the heck does that mean? One report said that by 2027, the SaaS market is expected to reach over $307 billion. Right? It's a lot of money. You look at all these providers that we have outside at these booths, right, and they can probably attest to that as well. And so when you have decentralized management, that means that you have buyers across multiple different categories and organizations within your business. In my particular world, like I said, I'm responsible for everything within the technology stack. And what that means is essentially anything that beeps, buzzes, or uses the internet. So that could be financial applications. That could be things like HR tools. If they're software oriented, they actually fall into my space. Right? So kind of a unique perspective, at least in the Priceline space. But it's all decentralized. So that's why it matters, right? There's hidden costs and inefficiencies in underutilized SaaS. This metric really struck me from Gartner. They said that up to 30% of SaaS spend is waste. And when I heard that, I immediately thought about the parallels of that specific number of 30% waste and how that intersects with cloud and FinOps, because that's the exact same number that they put as waste within the cloud. So either one of two things happen, right? Either there are some similarities in either the utilization or the way that these spends are being managed, or Gartner just loves the number 30%, 30, right? And I guess a coin toss on any given day. And so what's the role of FinOps in optimizing the SaaS spend? I think it's similar to the role that you guys are playing today as FinOps practitioners, right? You're there to put together these disparate systems, these decentralized teams, and reach out and branch out. One of the things that we talked about on Monday, we had a meeting here, there were several people in there, was culture, right? And a big thing, and the big thing of principles of FinOps, and the reason why you all here is because you bought into the culture of FinOps, right? It means something to you. There's a reason why you've traveled here to learn, to educate, to network on this really siloed subject, right? And I think that really matters. And so the role of that culture is branching out into these other organizations and bringing these disparate teams together, bringing these different SaaS products together and really making sense of the space, right? Just by a raise of hand, so I can understand, how many of you are managing your SaaS costs today? And when I say managing, meaning looking after the costs only. Okay. Now, by a raise of hand, how many of you feel like you have a good handle on optimizing that cost? Okay. All right. So it looks like all of us have some great work to do, right? And if you can the people who just raise their hand one more time? I want everybody who didn't raise their hand, remember these faces and come talk to these people after this session, okay? Because these are the connections that we want to make today and beyond, because these are the people who we want to learn from. This is the reason why we're all part of this community and all part of this organization, all right? So I'll get off of my proverbial soapbox and move on to the next slide. What's the current state of SaaS management? You got multiple vendors, right? Multiple billing models. On average, and again, this is an average, right? Companies are managing over 130 SaaS applications. 130, right? In larger scale companies, probably much more than this. But if you think about that, that's 130 different vendors. That's 130 different account managers. That's 130 different billing platforms. That's 130 different cost metrics that you have to consolidate into one centralized reporting, and maybe it's an Excel spreadsheet, right? Maybe it's something else. But that can become cumbersome, right? This is where something that really touched on me in this morning's keynote during the focus panel was kind of revolutionary in this space, was the fact that the 1.2 plus is looking at integrating and incorporating SaaS in there. Right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. There's a lack of the unified reporting and cost visibility. You can't manage what you can't see, and if you can't see everything and compare apples to apples, you know that this is all fruit, but I'm gonna dig my hand in the fruit basket, and if I want an apple and I wanna understand what that is, and I pick up a pear and I bite into it, I'm gonna be so confused about what's going on there. And so there's a lack of unified reporting and the cost visibility there. Some common pitfalls that we see, or that we've seen within Priceline, is shadow IT, right? One of the things that I ran into, and I went on a tirade of this when I first joined Priceline, was we had managers purchasing IT products on their corporate card, like with some sort of reoccurring expense on their corporate card. And then when these people would leave, right, it would still get billed to something. And I'd be like, what the heck is this $5,000 charge a month? What's going on? And $5,000 may not seem like that much a month, but that's $60K a year. And if you do that 20 times, right, then the economies of scale kind of get up and can quickly get out of control. And what I've noticed is that managers always think well, Chris, it's only $5,000, or Chris, it's only $300. And I'm like, yes, but if you and all the 800 other engineers want something for $300, then the expense just becomes enormous, all right? So that goes to the tune of overspending, right? Many of the times we want the latest and greatest thing, and I want to enable my product teams, my engineers to be able to spend and utilize the latest and greatest services, but at what cost? And that's where the FinOps principles come into place. So we talk about shift left, right? We talked about shift left earlier. This is why we're making more FinOps-driven product decisions. And if we bring that not only into the cloud space, but we bring that into the decisions on our software purchases, it really benefits the team as a whole and enables us to grow collectively and, like I said, creates that culture within the organization that allows us to stretch our arms into other organizations. And the last piece is underutilization, all right? By show of hands, we're gonna have a lot of audience participation today if you haven't noticed, but by show of hands, how many of you think that there's underutilized licenses or subscriptions within your areas? All right, keep your hands up, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Now everybody look at the people who don't have their hands up and talk to them afterwards. Those are the people who are doing it right, all right? All right, so when we talk about the core FinOps principles for SaaS optimization, visibility, accountability, optimization. We'll touch on each one of these, okay? Visibility. FinOps data should be accessible and timely. Does that sound familiar? In the same way, software and SaaS spend data should be accessible and timely. You need to gain insight into your SaaS landscape, right? How do you start doing that, right? At first, it may seem like you're trying to boil the ocean, but you do have to start somewhere, right? So what I personally did was I took a look at our P&L. I looked at the highest categories of software spend for us, and I just kind of started tackling the major service providers, right? I looked at what their billing metrics were. Is this a usage-based spend? Is this a license-based spend? How can I optimize that further, right? Or what do we do? Then I started to look at, are we actually utilizing these things that we purchased, right? If I'm spending $1.2 million a year on something, I should probably find out if I'm actually using it, right? And so those are some of the things that visibility and actually looking at the reports can create. But the key things that I want to touch on there is that it needs to be accessible and timely, right? So immediately I went directly to our service providers and I started querying them of like, hey, where do these reports exist that I can have monthly access to? And they're like, well, Chris, no one has ever asked us that. We just kind of bill you and you guys pay the bill and kind of go about our merry way. I'm like, well, where's the utilization metrics, right? How do I know that I'm getting the business value? Because it's not always about cost, right? I'm fine with paying for things as long as it's driving business value. And I think that's the important thing. Accountability. Everyone needs to take ownership of their cloud usage, but also everyone needs to take ownership of their SaaS usage. One of the things that struck me when I came on board was at Priceline, I'll tell you a little anecdote. We historically had all of the costs rolling up to core tech, right? So think about if I just aggregated all of our expenses and I just put it into one central bucket and said, hey, this is what you spent for the month, right, on SaaS. Sounds pretty similar to what we previously used to do with the cloud, huh? So what I started doing was I started making people accountable for their expenses. It was a very simple thing, right? Worked with our finance team, created some cost centers, and allocated those cost centers to their respective spend. And I made those cost centers meaningful though, right? So within Priceline, we operate in different products: hotels, rental cars, flights, packages, etc. So I made those cost centers representative of each one of those departments so that we could start to begin to see profitability and spend directly within those spaces. And we actually assigned the cost ownership. One of the things that I did here was, for the cost center view, I was able to allocate those expenses directly to those departments. But from a reporting view, and we talk about chargeback versus showback, in the showback view, I actually had named personnel on there. And I think tying a name to a spend is very powerful, right? When you have your name next to a dollar amount, there's some sense of responsibility that comes with that, right? When you like, hey, I'm responsible for X millions of dollars of spend within the organization, it's not necessarily a target, and by no means am I intending to name and shame people. It's all about the previous concept and principle, which is visibility, right? So the visibility ties back to the accountability. Once you have those things, then we can really work and dial in on optimization. Yep. So decisions need to be driven by the business value of the cloud. If you take that as a FinOps principle and you apply it to SaaS, how does that work? Decisions need to be driven by the business value of the software products that you're purchasing. It's very simple. Earlier, I just talked about shift left. That needs to be the onset, but if you're already in the midst of this, you have to do continuous rightsizing. You have to do the cost management piece in the optimization scope. And we do this at Priceline in multiple ways, right? I mentioned before that there's kind of two versions of this, SaaS spend. We call it usage-based spend and license-based spend. And I'm really, really simplifying that because even in both of those categories, there's variable different cost metrics and billing methodologies, et cetera. But for the sake of this conversation, let's just stick on those two, okay? Usage-based SaaS spend, I think, more closely aligns with what we're doing in the FinOps space and the FinOps world. License-based SaaS spend is a little bit different. And I think that's some of the contention that you're seeing from some of the vendors with going beyond the public cloud is like, but SaaS is not cloud. SaaS is not cloud. And why are we doing this? And the reason why we're doing this is because I'll be frank with you, a lot of my SaaS actually goes through my cloud. And the payment vehicle is through my cloud. Google Marketplace, right? AWS Marketplace. They have all these marketplaces where I can buy all these cool SaaS products, right? At the click of a button. Why would they not want me to apply these same FinOps principles to the things that they're making so readily accessible? All right? I'm seeing a lot of head nods, so maybe this is resonating with you all. Let's move on and talk about standardizing usage reporting, right? This is where I think focus is going to be a potential game changer. I think back on my history. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, right? I was born on a summer day in September. I'm just kidding. I won't go that far. But I got my start in quote unquote technology, scanning telecom invoices into a scanner that would then OCR the PDF and read that invoice, extract the data, and then put it out into some sort of regulated format. This is something called telecom expense management. When I started that, I was noticing that hey, I'm opening up the mail, I'm scanning these invoices. Each one of these things looks so different from one another, but they're the exact same service, right? This is at a time when Verizon and AT&T and all the baby bells, whether it's Vodafone, et cetera, all of these disparate billing systems and platforms, and somehow somebody had a great idea in the telecommunications world to say, hey, I will go and I'll unify that reporting for you, I'll spit it back, I'll cost allocate it for you, and I'll give you a report at the end of the day, tell you how much you owe and how much each department owes, et cetera, and you can pay us to do that, right? And it's so interesting to me, the parallels between that time in my life when I just started off my career and where we're at now with the cloud space. And now moving on to the SaaS space. I said this, 2 years ago at X. I said, man, it's really amazing to be a part of this community that seems to be exploding in an area that previously was untouched, but has some really deep parallels into what I have some experience in. So the first thing you need to do is establish a unified reporting framework. I believe that this is the step that Focus is going to tackle, or at least is going to attempt to tackle. We'll say that, right? But that's why this community is so important, right? It's important that you guys get involved in these areas so that you can tackle these challenges that are important to you. The second is centralizing data from all the SaaS platforms. How do you do that, right? A lot of people have asked me, Chris, what tools do you use? How are you managing all this? How are you getting all this visibility? How are we optimizing that spend? I won't exactly tell you what tools I'm using. I will tell you afterwards if you want to grab me. But we are centralizing data from all the SaaS platforms into one mechanism that allows us for some unique reporting and visibility that allows us to make decisions that drive our business and our products forward without the unnecessary costs. Now, the challenge there is what you're seeing here in purple, which is the challenge of inconsistent vendor metrics, right? I talked earlier about comparing apples to oranges and some of the issues that are involved with that. It's very cumbersome when you're comparing a usage-based tool to a license-based tool. So what I've done is I've bifurcated those and separated the two from one another. And so when I'm talking about categories or classes of SaaS spend, I really talk about those from those two unique perspectives and then dial it in from there. Because usage-based spend, you can talk about why those metrics are variable, and you can see if there's some seasonality to your spend, or you can see if it's driven by some big platform discussions or decisions that are happening. Whereas license-based spend, you can scale up or scale down depending on what your contract dictates, but generally you purchase it, you go and you negotiate it again, but you have to keep an eye on it still because you don't want that true up expense at the end of your contract when you have that unexpected bill that hits and then they recoup their expense for the past 3 years that you've been over licensed or oversubscribed. Yeah. All right. So, tools. I said I was going to talk about tools, but not explicit tools. So instead of talking about like, all right, you need to go use X tool. I'm sure there's plenty of people outside of these doors that will help you find the right tool for you. But instead of talking about tools, we'll talk about key features of a SaaS management platform that I was looking for when I went out. So the first thing that was important to me was putting a fence around my spend and putting everything into their appropriate containers. So that's the one of the things that was important to me was centralizing the data and the reporting. Those things were crucial because after coming off of applying these FinOps principles to the cloud spend, we had to figure out like what this meant for our SaaS area, and I had to get one sort of centralized report that encompassed all of our SaaS products and had some sort of cost metric associated with it. The other piece that I was looking for, because I don't have a giant team. You may, that you can just throw people at, but I don't. So automation is key for me. I want automated monitoring. I want license management. That allows me as a single person to have a report and look at the oversight in a more streamlined way. Yeah, let's call it streamlined. And so when I'm looking at SaaS optimization tools, those were the two things that I was initially looking for, because I was like, all right, well, what are we going to do when we continue to buy products and I don't know what category this one fits in, right? I wanted to understand, hey, if I have somebody from the dev team coming up to me saying, hey, Chris, I want to buy this really cool new thing, right? And I love to take people for their word on things, but I trust but validate. And so I was like, all right, well, do we have something in here that already does that? Like, no, this is like brand new. And what the better oversight was able to give me was I can see categorizations of my SaaS vendors in one, and I'm able to point to, hey, this is where we already have a potential vendor that plays in this space. Should we go and leverage that supplier already, or is the tool that you're trying to bring in, is it vastly different than something that we already have? And at that point, we collectively make a decision on whether we want to pursue this through negotiations, or we want to go and get some pricing maybe from our existing vendor on this area that they thrive in already. Okay? All right. That leads me to my next step. Harmonizing our SaaS contracts for consistency. I used to be the director of IT at UBS, a big Swiss bank, right? And one of the things that I worked on there was actually a framework for tech contracts. So a standard framework for tech contracts. Just by show of hands, when you guys are signing contracts today with your suppliers, how many of you are doing it on vendor paper? Okay. And how many of you are using your own paper? Okay. And then for the rest of you are using no paper. What's that? Oh, okay. How many of you guys are signing contracts that are from your own legal team versus from your vendor's legal team? Okay. 50-50. Got it. So what I did was I created a framework for tech contracts within the space that aligned with the things that I was looking for. And I think that that's what you probably need to go out and do. Understand the things that are important to you and what you want to get out of your SaaS providers. One of the things that was really important to me was reporting. So I put in and I highlight these key clauses that I insert into these contracts to say, hey, this is how I want my reporting, and these are the metrics that I want you to report on. And if they redline it, we'll go back and forth. It takes some time, right? It takes some negotiation. Rome wasn't built in a day. I don't know what the equivalent of Spain is, but yeah, same thing. It takes some time, right? And so, again, one of the key clauses that I have is around reporting. So you can go ahead and ask me after this. I can share some of that knowledge with you guys if you want. But aligning those contract terms with usage and cost metrics is super important, right? You want to understand at a carnal level, like what is driving your spend from this contract, because what did they say earlier at Focus? Naming things are hard. Naming things is hard. Wording things is hard too. When you get in the legal jargon of things, it becomes cumbersome to figure out how am I actually being billed for this certain thing, right? You have soft caps. So, I can go 20% above my cap of licenses without paying for it in year one, but in year two, I'm gonna get charged 50% of the delta between YX plus B, right? And I'm like doing this complex math formula, trying to figure out if I owe them at the end of the year or not. And so really working into those contracts and harmonizing those at the onset is key. Leveraging our vendor relationships for better terms and negotiating flexibility into SaaS agreements, I think go hand in hand, right? I'm not saying be buddy-buddy with your, with your vendors or your suppliers, but lean on them. I mean, there's a relationship there. You guys have to work with them, right? Engage with your TAMs, engage with your account managers. Understand like what the economics are of these contracts. Understand what the economics of these deals are, because once you do that, then you can really help to drive the business value not only for yourself, but drive the business value within the contract, and then that elevates you to bring that business value to your company, and you get to do things like this, right? Take over the SaaS world. So we'll talk about a little bit of best practices in SaaS optimization. These are some points that we continue to touch on here. I'll move out of the way for you there. But proactive monitoring, real-time tracking and alerts. So there are companies that will identify when end users log in to an application and notify you that, hey, there's this login here, and that helps with shadow IT, right? Or usability metrics, right? Because oh gosh, I'm having PTSD right now, but how many times have you guys found out that somebody said, oh, I really have this really cool metric that I want to track, or I have this really cool product that I want to buy, and then they're like, it's going to change the world, and 3 people use it. And you spent all that money trying to figure out, and you locked into a 3-year agreement for something that 3 people are using. And so that's why the proactive monitoring or real-time tracking is perfect for that. But that also aligns, and I think this slide could have been way bigger. I could have made all these different parallels and connections, because that ties in with the accountability and the visibility, right? Doing regular SaaS audits to eliminate underutilized service. How many, again, by a show of hands, I told you guys are gonna get a workout, so. By a show of hands, how many of you are actually auditing your SaaS products today? All right, so when I look at, when I think about SaaS audits, it doesn't have to be a overly complex thing, right? It can be as simple as looking at your top 20, who probably represents 80% of your spend, right? The old 80-20 rule. Because SaaS can tend to have a long tail, and I don't spend a lot of my time in the minutia of the tail. I spend a lot of my time on what can make the biggest impact immediately. And so we do regular SaaS audits to eliminate some of our underutilized services. And when we identify underutilized services, we actually go to the accountability partner on the tech side and say, hey, listen, this is your original business case that you brought to the team. This is how you said you were gonna use this product. This is the impact that you said it was gonna make. But we're not seeing that materialize based on the utilization of this SaaS product. And at that point, it is not a, again, name and shame thing. It's a conversation, right? How can I help you enable your team to have access to this? Because I truly believe in that business case that you drafted, right? I truly believe in this, and I want to invest in the success of your product, but I can't sell the business value if nobody's using it. So those are things that we need to take a look at in underutilized services. And establishing governance framework for SaaS approvals and renewals. Now this is something that Priceline actually does. We have a software purchase renewal team. So it's a triad between procurement, tech, and finance. Every Tuesday, we have a meeting, and contracts that are up for renewal in the next 3, 6, 9 months come to this meeting. We have an agenda set out, and they'll present their case of why they need to either renew a contract or why they want to purchase something new. They have to have looked at other competitors within the space. They have to have done their due diligence. And then between the triad of procurement, finance, and tech, we make a decision on whether to move forward to continue to pursue that as long as it aligns with the budget and the value proposition that has been established. So I think that that's a really, I won't say it's unique, but it's something that we didn't have before that we established as part of this process. So people often ask me like, Chris, aren't you just talking about IT asset management or SAM or ITFM? I'm like, kind of, but not really. When we look at these three, we talk about IT asset management. I'm tracking and managing hardware and software assets, right? There's not a cost component in there. So that's where the gap is. And that's where the intersection is with FinOps. You know, think about drawing lines to each one of these, right? With a FinOps as the layer underneath. Software asset management. It's focused primarily on software compliance and licensing, right? So again, we have that overlayer of FinOps. And then the last one, IT financial management. It's for financial transparency and budgeting for all of the IT costs, right? So it's almost too broad for what we're looking at specifically within SaaS, and where FinOps is really focused on real-time, dynamic, cost-driven management and optimization. And so what FinOps does is sits as an overlayer over all of these to kind of bring continuous cross-functional collaboration approach to all of these together that allows for us to apply those principles there. You know, I think last time that I talked to this on the September summit call, I think that was a large piece, was like, well, why isn't this all just like the same kind of thing? And that's why I answer like yes and no, kind of at the same time. I think of FinOps as the layer over all of these pieces that kind of conjoins those together and allows us to manage this in a more optimal way. They told me not to touch that button, so. Priceline SaaS optimization journey. I'll take you a little bit through kind of what we did and what our approach was. So I've scattered this throughout the talk, but initially we had decentralized purchasing. The lack of transparency was there, right? I had everybody with a corporate card making purchases. So what I quickly did was I reached out to our finance team. I said, hey, can you give me a list over the past year, everything, all the transactions on corporate cards that were coded to software? And she said, yeah, because one of the things that we do is we work off of an amortization schedule, so we have a fixed asset register. And what we do is we'll take the cost, we usually prepay our contracts and we amortize it over the life of the service, right? And so what's happening is that was my primary visibility to all the contracts that we had in place for our SaaS providers. So what I was missing was all the things that were being purchased on credit cards, because those were just monthly recurring charges that were being reconciled like the month after or sometimes months after, depending on when people submit their expense reports, which we all know is in a timely manner, right? So it was tough getting a hold of that, right? So we had to start implementing SaaS management tools and best practices once I got the lay of the land, right? I initially started just like writing down the vendors in an Excel spreadsheet. of like, hey, here's the vendor, here's the cost, here's the vendor, here's the cost, here's the vendor, here's the cost. And then that spreadsheet got way too cumbersome to manage, because then I wanted to figure out like, oh, I should put a link to the contract in here, and then, oh, I should put what date it starts and what date it ends, and then, oh, I should put the owner, and I should put X, Y, Z. And so I needed a tool to help me. So we started implementing a SaaS management tool and applying some of the best practices from FinOps to our SaaS spend. I mean, you guys know all the principles here, right? We're all practitioners here, and it's incredible the different applications that exists in the FinOps space to other areas of spend, which is why I'm so happy that one of the themes approved by the TAC was kind of beyond the public cloud, in particular SaaS. I mean, 72% of the people who were surveyed, the practitioners that were surveyed, said that SaaS spend is important to them. And so that software purchase renewal / triage committee is what I just talked about earlier, where we have this view, and it's a regularly scheduled cadence. It's not like, oh man, hey, we got this contract that we have to sign by tomorrow, or this key component of our system is gonna go down. We're regularly looking at these things 3, 6, 9, sometimes 12 months in advance with some of our larger agreements. And so that's all part of that. And so what did that result in? Well, we have improved visibility. We've optimized our spend. We've really cut costs out of that software line item. And we've enhanced our reporting. You know, I think that we have a better handle today on where things are at, why they're there, and what we have, right? So what should you take away from today? Aside from going out and having some fun, let's talk about this. Visibility is king. You can't optimize what you can't see. We're Priceline, right? So let's do some like travel anecdotes here. If I just picked a spot on the map and decided I want to go travel there, right? I would have no clue where I was going, what I was doing, right? And so I need to actually zoom in on that Google map, or zoom in on that map. I don't want to be vendor specific, but zoom in on that map and identify where I'm going to go, what the area is, et cetera. That way I can optimize my trip to the best of my ability. Accountability drives action, right? Ownership is real key in controlling SaaS spend. You guys ever gone on a group trip, right? Somebody needs to be responsible for something. Maybe you're responsible for picking out where we go to dinner on Monday, right? You're responsible for finding out what we're gonna do in terms of like historical sites, what we're gonna do, where we're gonna go clubbing later at night, right? It's important to have those roles in a travel team, but it's also important to have those roles in your technology teams as well. Optimization is a journey. See what I did there? SaaS management isn't just a one-time fix, it's ongoing, right? It's a continuous process, similar to how you approach your cloud FinOps practice. You don't just set it and forget it with the optimization. Something's gonna rear its head again, and you're gonna have to go look at it and tackle that. FinOps is collaboration. This is one that I really think is key. FinOps is collaboration. Finance, IT, engineering, they all need to work together, and I think that's the beauty of applying these FinOps principles to the SaaS space, is that we're by nature a collaborative conglomerate, right? And we can take these things that we've learned and these principles that we've applied to the cloud and really engage into other areas beyond public cloud, specifically within the SaaS space. Automate what you can, especially like I said, in a small team like mine. Automation is key. Like I said, that was a key driver for providers that we were looking at, because I want to let the machines do the work so that they can handle the busy work. I can handle the big stuff, right? I don't want to be down in the minutia of that tail that I talked about earlier. And remember, not all surprises are fun, especially in SaaS, right? You ever went on a trip and we're like, I don't know, got food poisoning, right? And you just kind of ruined your trip. Surprise! It's not fun. Um, so, so those are the things that the visibility kind of creates, right? And so, I mean, aligning with Priceline's mission statement of being the best travel deal makers and remembering the moments that matter, I'll implore you all to take some of the things that you've learned today, some of the things that you learned yesterday, to go out in your organizations and become your organization's best SaaS deal makers. All right? Thank you all for your time today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference, and I'll see you later.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X Europe content on our YouTube channel playlist. Like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and leave comments and questions for speakers to help our channel. We appreciate your support.